you. I mean, it's been a while since we've touched into this, and we haven't done it much on this podcast. I mean, obviously competition, winners, losers, you explained the data there. What are some other scenarios, just studies that have been striking to you or that have stood out over the years?
I think for testosterone, I think the big ones have been competition, between males. And no, I don't. I mean, there's a stress response, but that's a whole other thing.
What about sex behavior itself?
In animals, at least, we know that there's a relationship there. That in males of most species, let's take rats, if you take away the testosterone, within a few weeks they'll stop mounting altogether. And if you give them testosterone, after a few weeks they start mounting again, right? So we know that plasticity is there, and we know that it's driven by testosterone. But in animals where they're in charge of their own testosterone, we've known for a long time that if a male is exposed to the odors of a receptive female, that causes a spike in their testosterone. And so that's kind of preparing them for maybe I'll be lucky. Maybe there's something coming down the pike. And so we know that that's a reciprocal relationship when the animal's in charge of the hormone.
For the longest time, thanks to your textbooks, and by the way, folks, Mark has authored some of the most important textbooks on hormones and behavior, developmental neurobiology. I mean, he's a true scholar of the whole field, and so I'm immensely grateful to him that those textbooks have formed the backbone of a lot of solo episodes of the podcast. So, the textbook version of male versus female sexual behavior has been a story about females having a circuit that goes from brain to body to control this thing they call lordosis, the arching of the lower back, the receptivity, the willingness to mate, and the males having a circuit that goes from brain to spinal cord to body, involving arousal, erection, mounting, insertion, ejaculation. I mean, your lab and others has really parsed this right down to the details. And yet, of course, people have sex that way, but also other ways. And so for a lot of people who aren't familiar with hormones and neural circuits and behavior, the sort of strict context kind of is still forms the framework. I mean, I've learned, and I'm now fortunate that this podcast has been around more than 5 years, so I no longer have to tap dance around things, right? So people will say, oh, well, there's this lordosis behavior in the female. She's receptive or not. He mounts, et cetera. And then there's gay men who have to have sex a certain way that mimics the female sex pattern of behavior. And so people do this one-to-one, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's understandable why they do that if they're not educated, but how should we make sense of these biological circuits that are in the textbooks that define stereotyped, literally motor behavior? It's almost like saying like females have sex this way with males, males have sex this way with females, but then the caveat is always like, oh, but in humans, all that goes away. And there's these like bonobos that are a little bit more like humans. So did we waste all our time studying that stuff? I mean, really.
And you're getting at exactly what every textbook author has to deal with, right? Which is, as the old joke goes, you look where the light is, right? Mm-hmm. So we know so much more about the circuits that are involved in the motor behaviors because they're relatively easy to trace and relatively easy to manipulate and relatively easy to study. We know lots about the motor patterns in animals. We know a lot less about the motivational patterns in animals, which in human sexual behavior is, I mean, in many ways, that's the whole show. That's really what's, and we don't really have good animal models of libido, right? And this was brought home to me many years ago now. I was on a session of 60 Minutes, the CBS News program. And Leslie Stahl was there in our lab. I mean, the producers had called me up and said, can you show us a way that early testosterone exposure changes behavior permanently? And I said, sure, I can do that. Give me some time. So I went to the lab and castrated a bunch of rats on the day of birth. I know how to do that. I'm not proud of it, but I know how to do that. And they came 3 months later. And so I showed them those motor patterns you talk about. So here's a typical female. I've given her hormones, estrogen and progesterone, so I know she's going to be receptive. And here's a male rat that I know has had lots of experience copulating. And Leslie immediately dubbed him Romeo. Okay, well, this is Romeo. And she hates rats, by the way, so she was very brave. And so I drop a female on top of Romeo, and he starts mounting, and she shows the lordosis posture. And it's all beautiful and easy. And we do that several times. And now I'm going to drop a male, a control male in. And Romeo, of course, you don't know unless you try. He mounts several times, and the male rat acts like nothing's going on. I mean, it's just a bored thing on Earth. And Romeo eventually gives up. Now I drop into the cage a male rat who I castrated on the day of birth, 90 days before, and I've given him the same hormones I gave the female to make her receptive. Romeo hops on, and sure enough, a beautiful lordosis, right? Of the sort that the control male never showed. So here, this neonatally castrated male is showing very female-like patterns. And Ms. Stahl kept asking me, would you say this is a gay rat? And it's, I'm sitting there, and I'm definitely in a tough spot because I don't think my rats have an orientation. I mean, we just saw Romeo happily mount any rat I threw in the cage because what do you know? Try your luck. And so, she asked me several, and I knew she wanted me to say that, but I said, what I would say, I don't remember exactly what ended up in the final. What I would say is that this is a rat whose sexual behavior has been permanently changed because of something that happened to him a long time ago, at the very beginning of development. And really, that's the best I can do in terms of any rat model of sexual orientation. I don't think my rats have a sexual orientation. If I give the female those hormones, she's going to show lordosis to whoever mounts her. And my male rat, he will mount any rat he comes across just in case he gets a lordosis out of them.
Well, good on you for not getting corralled into giving a particular answer. I've recently joined CBS as a correspondent. If we have this conversation on 60 Minutes, I promise to not try and force an answer. Romeo is an interesting case because I think for most people, including myself, I thought that you were going to say that Romeo was willing to try to mount a female. Mm-hmm. If she was receptive, he would mate. If not, he wouldn't. But I was surprised that he would try to mount a male as well. That doesn't align, at least with my experience of male human behavior.
Certainly not. That's right. This is the thing that's distinctive about humans is we're not actually that particular about what particular behaviors we engage in, what motor behaviors, and we're overwhelmingly interested in who our partner is, mm-hmm. right? That is an overriding concern that I don't think my rats have. I think few animals do. Here's you're the anthropologist from Mars, and I tell you, here's a person that 50%, whoever's the sexiest man alive this year, People magazine, or I don't know who that happens to be.
Well, this is an interesting discussion altogether because people have been lining up the images of these people and claiming that there's sort of like this effeminate drift that takes us back to a time in the early 90s when there was this sort of revision about male facial stereotypes. We can get back to that, but
okay.
Yeah, well, it's not the point being that it's not fixed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, whoever. Let's say it's George Clooney. So here's someone that half the planet believes is an ideal sexual partner, right? But the other half of the planet finds him totally unacceptable, even if the behaviors they engaged in would be pretty much the same. And so, in terms of positions and who's doing what to whose genitalia, et cetera, I mean, for most people, it isn't that there has to be one particular act. I suppose there's some, but for most people, there may be a variety of acts that they want to be engaged in with that other person, and their overwhelming concern is the gender of that other person or the sex of that other person. It's hard to have an animal model of that. I actually do know one example in sheep. If you want to talk about this,
of all things,
yes. Oh, I noticed. So Chuck Roselli out at Oregon, he's the one that studied this very carefully. I guess shepherds have known for ages that in any herd, there are some rams who will not mount a female ever and keep mounting other males. And of course, to maintain a shepherd, to maintain a herd, you don't need every male to reproduce. So, but in the old days, those males got sent off to slaughter, right? Well, hearing these rumors, Chuck did these tests where he would put a bunch of females that are in stocks, so they can't move, and they're all ready for mating, and he put a ram in with them. And most rams, of course, will mount the females. He puts in these rams that prefer males. If there's a variety of sheep's butts sticking out at him, he'll mount males, including sometimes having intromission through the anus, and all the way to ejaculation. And he never mounts a female. In some cases, they'll have one of these. I'm going to call them gay rams. I think they have an orientation. He'll put this gay ram where there's a dozen females, and he might be in that paddock for 12 hours and never mount a single female.
Highly unusual for male rams.
And these are not typical rams. It's like a small percentage of the population. And I don't know how to explain that. I mean, you would think that these gay rams, an ejaculation is an ejaculation, right? An orgasm is an orgasm. I presume they have you would think that at some point, there's nothing else to do in here. I'll mount one of these ewes, and they never do. And I don't know how you can explain that, except that there's some aversive component that rams do care about the sex of their partner, and that for these gay rams, there's some aversive component to that. By the way, Chuck told me not too long ago, there's a company that has identified these gay rams and decided that instead of sending them off to slaughter, they're going to harvest their wool and sell them and make them into clothing. So you can buy wool clothing that came from gay rams and know that you saved them from the slaughterhouse.
There's no response that's appropriate to that statement.
and apparently they're out of stock, so it's been a big success.
Actually, I can think of about 50 different responses to that, none of which are appropriate or have any real conceptual importance. So I won't say.